What if I told you that the galaxy's most feared apex predators once brought their dying children to humans on begging us to do what they couldn't? What if the greatest warriors in the universe discovered that true strength isn't about conquest, but about something far more powerful? This is the story that changed everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human among the stars. On the death world known as Eleven 9, something happened today that changed everything we thought we knew about the galaxy's most feared predators. Picture this. You're a human medic stationed on one of the most hostile planets in the Outer Rim. The air itself can kill you without your breathing apparatus. The ground trembles every few hours from seismic activity that would level entire cities back on Earth. And the wildlife, well, let's just say everything on Eleven 9 evolved with one simple rule: kill or be killed. But today, something impossible happened. At exactly 1400 hours local time, our perimeter sensors picked up an incoming vessel. Not unusual, except this wasn't one of ours. The ship bore the distinctive crimson markings of the Velkarii Dominion. If you don't know who the Velkarii are, consider yourself lucky. These aren't your typical alien neighbors who drop by to borrow a cup of sugar. The Velkarii are what nightmares are made of. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with a natural armor plating that can deflect plasma rounds and claws that can slice through reinforced steel like it's paper. They're apex predators who've conquered 12 star systems through sheer brutality. Their philosophy is simple: the weak deserve extinction, and mercy is a disease that weakens the strong. So when a Velkarii scout ship landed outside our medical facility and requested permission to dock, every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Because here's the thing about the Velkarii: they don't ask for help, ever. They take what they want when they want it, and they certainly don't knock politely on your door. But there they were, transmitting on our emergency medical frequency. In the message they sent, it was just 4 words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Do what we can. Now I've been serving with the United Nations Xenobiology Corps for 7 years. I've seen first contact scenarios go sideways in ways that would make your blood run cold. I've patched up soldiers after encounters with creatures that science fiction writers couldn't dream up in their worst nightmares. But nothing, and I mean nothing, had prepared me for what I was about to witness. Because when that Velkarii scout stepped out of his ship, he wasn't carrying weapons. He wasn't issuing demands or making threats. Instead, he was cradling something in his massive arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature designed for war. It was a bundle wrapped in what looked like bioluminescent silk. And from within that bundle came the faintest sound, a soft, rhythmic whimpering that made every human in the facility freeze in their tracks. The Velkarii scout looked directly at our chief medical officer, Dr. Lion Rowe, and spoke in broken but understandable, standard Cubs dying. You help, we cannot. And that's when I realized we were about to witness one thing that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about survival evolution and what it truly means to be human in a galaxy full of monsters. Dr. Lion Rowe stepped forward without hesitation. Now, if you knew Leanne the way I do, you'd understand why that moment was so significant. She's not the type to rush into anything. Back on Earth, she was a trauma surgeon who saved lives in the worst war zones humanity had ever seen. Cool under pressure doesn't even begin to describe her. When everyone else is panicking, his heartbeat actually slows down. But standing there facing a creature that could literally tear her in half without breaking a sweat, she moved with the kind of calm confidence that made you believe everything was going to be okay, even when logic screamed that nothing about this situation was okay. Bring them inside, she said simply. No questions about protocol, no hesitation about potential threats, just pure instinctive compassion. That's when Kara Reyes emerged from the psychological wing of our facility. Kara's our specialist in interspecies trauma therapy. Before joining the Corps, she spent 3 years as a battlefield medic during the Centauri conflicts. But what made her invaluable out here wasn't her medical training. It was her uncanny ability to read emotions across species barriers. Kara could look at an alien's body language and tell you whether they were scared, angry, or desperate, even if they were shaped like nothing you had ever seen before. The moment she laid eyes on that Velkarii scout, her expression changed. "He's terrified," she whispered to me. "Look at his stance, the way he's holding that bundle. This isn't a warrior, this is a father." The scout, who later introduced himself as Tharnix, followed us into the medical bay. And when he finally unwrapped that bioluminescent silk, my heart nearly stopped. Inside were 3 Velkarii cubs, but these weren't the miniature predators you might expect. They were tiny, fragile things, no bigger than house cats, with downy fur that shimmered in colors I didn't even have names for. Their breathing was labored, their little bodies trembling with fever. And their eyes, God, their eyes were so human-like in their vulnerability that it physically hurt to look at them. "How long have they been sick?" Leon asked, immediately switching into full medical mode. Tharnik struggled with the words. Seven of your days. We try everything. Our healers, our technology, our strongest medicines. Nothing works. They get weaker and weaker," and his voice cracked in a way that sent chills down my spine. "Because you have to understand, the Velkarii don't show weakness. Ever. Their entire culture is built around the idea that emotional display is a fatal flaw. But here was this apex predator, this unstoppable killing machine, openly weeping over 3 dying cubs. Kara stepped closer and something incredible happened. The smallest cub, the one that looked barely alive, turned its head toward her voice. Just slightly, but enough to show it was still fighting. "What's that signal we picked up earlier?" Leon asked, checking her scanner readings. "The one that led you to us?" Tharnix looked confused for a moment, then his eyes widened in what I can only describe as horrified realization. "You mean you did not send the beacon?" "What beacon?" Kara asked. 3 days ago, we detected transmission from this sector. Medical frequency. Message said," he paused, struggling with the translation. "Message said, bring the young ones. We know how to help. We thought you were calling to us." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Because if we didn't send that message and the Velkarii didn't send it, then who did? And more importantly, how did they know the cubs were dying? But before any of us could process that terrifying implication, the smallest cub suddenly went into convulsions. Its tiny body arched in pain, and the sound it made, this heartbreaking whimper that seemed to echo from the depths of its soul, galvanized everyone in the room. "Get me a full bioscan now," Leanne shouted, her hands already moving to stabilize the cub. "Kara, I need you to keep the father calm. Whatever's happening to these cubs, we're going to figure it out." And that's when we discovered something that would change the course of interspecies relations forever. Because what was killing these cubs wasn't just any ordinary disease. The bioscans came back, and what we saw defied every principle of xenobiology I'd ever learned. These cubs weren't just sick. Their immune systems were being systematically dismantled at the cellular level. Whatever pathogen had infected them was unlike anything in our databases. It was adaptive, intelligent, and worst of all, it seemed specifically designed to target Velkarii physiology. "This doesn't make sense," Leon muttered, staring at the readouts. "Look at these protein markers. This pathogen is breaking down their natural defenses faster than their bodies can rebuild them. It's like watching a demolition in slow motion." Tharnix had been standing silently in the corner, his massive frame rigid with barely contained anguish. But when he heard Leanne's assessment, something shifted in his posture. "You must come with me," he said suddenly, "to the nest. You must see where they were born." Now, under normal circumstances, following an apex predator into unknown territory would be considered suicide. But these weren't normal circumstances. And if we were to save these cubs, we needed to understand what had infected them. The flight to the nest took us deep into the storm root thicket, a region of Erevan 9 that even our military scouts avoided. The vegetation here wasn't just hostile, it was actively carnivorous. Trees with root systems that could sense movement from kilometers away. Vines that secreted paralytic toxins. And somewhere in the middle of this nightmare landscape, the Velkarii had built their breeding grounds. But when we finally reached the coordinates Tharnix had given us, what we found wasn't anything like the traditional Velkarii warrior compounds I'd read about in xenobiology texts. Instead, we discovered something that looked almost organic. The nest wasn't built, it was grown. Rising from the jungle floor like some impossible fusion of architecture and biology, this structure pulsed with a rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of a heartbeat. Bioluminescent veins ran along its walls carrying what looked like nutrients or information, and the entire thing seemed to be breathing. "My God," Kara whispered, her scientific curiosity overriding her survival instincts. "It's alive." The whole structure was alive. Tharnix led us through passages that felt more like arteries than corridors. The walls were warm to the touch, and I swear I could feel them responding to our presence. As we moved deeper into the nest, that pulsing rhythm grew stronger, more insistent. "This is where the cubs were hatched," Tharnix explained, stopping before a chamber that made my skin crawl. The room was filled with what looked like incubation pods, but they weren't mechanical devices. They were organic growths, each one connected to the nest's circulatory system by thick rope-like umbilicals. Most of the pods were empty, now their surfaces dark and dormant, but 3 of them still glowed with that eerie bioluminescence, and when I looked closer, I could see the remnants of birthing fluids that hadn't quite dried. The sickness started here. Tharnix continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "First day after hatching. 1 cub, then 2, then in all 3. We thought it was normal weakness. Young ones are fragile. But this," he gestured helplessly at the pods. "This was different." Lion was already running her scanner over the nearest pod, and the readings she was getting made her face go pale. "These aren't natural biological structures," she said slowly. "The cellular composition is all wrong. It's like someone took Velkarii DNA and mixed it with something else, something that shouldn't exist." That's when Kara made a discovery that sent ice water through my veins. She'd been examining the base of one of the umbilical connections when her scanner picked up something buried in the nest's foundation. "There's technology here," she called out. "Nanoscale circuitry integrated into the biological matrix. This whole structure isn't just alive, it's been engineered." The implications hit us all at the same time. Someone had built this place. Someone had created these hybrid incubation pods. And someone had deliberately infected the cubs with a pathogen designed to kill them, slowly, painfully. But who? And more importantly, why Tharnix's expression had gone from grief to rage, and when a Velkarii gets angry, the temperature in the room seems to drop from sheer intimidation. "You mean someone did this to my children on purpose?" Before any of us could answer, the nest around us suddenly shuddered. The bioluminescent veins flared brighter, and that rhythmic pulsing became frantic, almost panicked. Emergency lighting kicked in throughout the structure, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. And then we heard it, a sound that made every primitive survival instinct in my brain start screaming. It was coming from deep within the nest's core, rising through the organic corridors like the cry of some massive wounded animal. But this wasn't an animal. As the sound grew louder, more distinct, I realized with growing horror what we were actually hearing. It was a transmission, a signal being broadcast from somewhere deep within the nest's biological infrastructure. And the message, when we finally managed to decode it, contained just 5 words that made my blood turn to ice. "Phase 1 behavioral testing complete." That transmission hit me like a punch to the gut, but not just because of what it implied about whoever was behind this nightmare. It hit me because it brought back memories of the first time humanity had proven we were different from every other species in the galaxy. Let me take you back 18 months ago to the Kepler Station incident. That's when we first encountered the Arborean Collective, a peaceful species of plant-like beings who had been systematically infected with what their scientists called the Gray Death. Their entire homeworld was dying, literally withering away, as this pathogen turned their bioluminescent forests into ash. The Galactic Council had already written them off. Natural selection, they called it. Evolution, weeding out the weak. Even the other advanced civilizations, species with technology that made our best efforts look like stone tools, had declared the Arboreans a lost cause. But Dr. Lion Rowe refused to accept that verdict. For 3 weeks straight, she worked 18-hour days in a makeshift laboratory, analyzing tissue samples and developing potential treatments. I remember finding her passed out over her microscope more than once, muttering equations in her sleep. The Velkarii delegation was there too, observing our efforts with what I can only describe as amused contempt. Their high marshal at the time, a scarred veteran named Karath, made his opinion clear during one particularly heated council session. "You waste time on the weak," he'd said, his voice carrying that distinctive Velkarii growl that made your bones vibrate. "This is not mercy, this is foolishness. Resources spent saving the dying could be used strengthening the living. Your species will learn this truth, or you will share their fate." But Kara Reyes, God bless her stubborn heart, stood up in that chamber full of apex predators and responded with words that still give me chills when I think about them. "We don't do it for thanks," she'd said, looking Korath straight in his terrifying eyes. "We don't do it for strategic advantage or political gain. We do it because it's right. Because when you have the power to save lives and you choose not to use it, you're not strong. You're just cruel." The chamber had gone dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on a ship 3 sectors away. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, talks to a Velkarii High Marshal like that and lives to tell about it. But Korath didn't order her execution. Instead, he'd done something even more surprising. He'd laughed. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "We shall see, little human," he'd said. "We shall see if your compassion is strength or weakness." 2 days later, Leon cracked the code. The treatment she developed didn't just cure the Grey Death. It made the Arborians stronger than they had ever been before. Their forests came back more vibrant, more resilient. Their entire civilization was reborn literally from the ashes. And when the news reached the Velkarii homeworld, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in their recorded history, a Velkarii High Marshal sent a formal acknowledgement to another species. Not praise, mind you. That would have been too much to ask. But acknowledgement, recognition that maybe, just maybe, there was more than one way to define strength. That's why this moment in the nest was so significant. Because somewhere in the galaxy, someone was running an experiment. They'd created a scenario designed to test something specific about interspecies relationships. They'd infected Velkarii cubs with a deadly pathogen and then somehow arranged for the Velkarii to bring those cubs to us. The question that was eating away at my brain was simple. What exactly were they testing? Our medical capabilities, our willingness to help former enemies, or something deeper? Something about the fundamental nature of what makes humans human. Standing there in that pulsing organic nightmare, listening to that transmission repeat itself over and over, I realized we were rats in a maze. Someone was watching our every move, analyzing our responses, measuring our choices against some unknown criteria. And the most terrifying part, we had no idea if we were passing or failing their test. But as I looked at Tharnix, this apex predator who had swallowed his pride and asked his people's former enemies for help, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever entity was running this experiment had made one critical error in their calculations. They'd underestimated what happens when you threaten children in front of humans. Because there's something they clearly didn't understand about our species. We don't just help because it's strategically advantageous or because we expect something in return. We help because when we see suffering, we can't not help. It's not a choice for us. It's who we are at our core. And whoever was behind this twisted experiment was about to learn that lesson the hard way. We raced back to the medical facility with those transmission recordings, but the moment we arrived, it was clear that not everyone was on board with our mission of mercy. 3 more Velkarii ships had landed while we were gone, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The newly arrived Velkarii weren't like Tharnix. These were warriors in the truest sense, scarred veterans with the kind of cold, calculating eyes that had seen too much death to flinch at a little more. Their leader, a massive female named Velkarii, stood nearly 9 feet tall and carried herself with the kind of authority that made even other Velkarii step aside. "This is weakness," she growled the moment she saw us enter the medical bay. Her voice carried the distinctive harmonics of someone who'd spent decades commanding troops in battle. "Tharnix shames our people by begging mercy from inferior species. Now I've been in enough tense situations to know when violence is about to erupt, and every instinct I had was screaming danger. But Dr. Leon Rowe, she walked right up to this 9-foot killing machine like she was approaching a concerned parent at a school conference. "The cubs are responding to treatment," she said calmly, completely ignoring the implicit threat in Velkarii's posture. "But we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. This pathogen is unlike anything we've encountered." Velkarii's response was to bare her teeth, rows of serrated bone that could tear through body armor. "You understand nothing, soft skin. Cubs die because they are weak. That is nature. That is strength. To preserve the weak is to doom the strong." But here's where things got interesting. Because while Velkarii was delivering her speech about survival of the fittest, something incredible was happening in the medical bay behind her. Kara Reyes was sitting beside the treatment pods, and she'd started doing something that seemed completely insane under the circumstances. She was humming. Quietly, almost under her breath, she was humming a simple melody, something that sounded like a lullaby from her childhood back on Earth. And the cubs were responding. Their bio readings, which had been erratic and weak, suddenly started stabilizing. Their breathing became more regular. The smallest one, the one that had been barely clinging to life, actually turned its head toward the sound of Kara's voice. "What sorcery is this?" Velkarii demanded, her aggressive posture faltering for the first time since she'd arrived. "It's not sorcery," Lion replied, pulling up the cub's latest bioscans on her tablet. "It's neuroscience. Kara's voice is triggering a parasympathetic response in their nervous systems. The melody is creating neural pathways that help their bodies fight the infection more effectively." But that wasn't the most incredible part. The most incredible part was what happened when Lian started explaining her treatment protocol to Velkarii. Because buried in all that medical jargon was a revelation that would change everything. "The serum we've developed shows a 78% success rate in preliminary trials," Lion continued. "But there's a complication. The pathogen has created a secondary immune response that makes the cubs hypersensitive to standard treatment protocols. We're going to need to modify our approach." She paused, checking her data one more time. "There's approximately a 20% mortality risk with the modified serum. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't recommend proceeding without more extensive testing." The medical bay went dead silent. You could feel the weight of that statistic settling over everyone present. 20% mortality risk meant that one of those 3 cubs might not survive the treatment that was supposed to save them. Tharnik stepped forward, his massive frame somehow conveying both desperation and determination. What are the chances if you do nothing?" Lian's expression was grim. "Without treatment, 100% mortality within 48 hours. That's when something shifted in the dynamic between the Velkarii. Velkarii, who had been radiating hostility and contempt just moments before, suddenly looked uncertain. She stared at the cubs in their treatment pods, these tiny, fragile lives hanging in the balance, and for the first time I saw something other than coldness in her eyes. "You would risk your reputation, you're standing among your people, to save cubs that are not even your own species?" she asked quietly. Kara looked up from her vigil beside the smallest cub, and her answer was so simple, so fundamentally human that it hit like a thunderbolt. "They're children," she said. "That's all that matters." And that's when the smallest cub did something that made everyone in the room freeze. It reached out with one tiny clawed hand and wrapped its fingers around Kara's thumb. The gesture was so innocent, so trusting, that I heard more than one hardened soldier's breath catch in their throat. But Velkarii's reaction was the most telling of all. This apex predator, this living weapon who had conquered star systems, took one look at that simple moment of connection between human and cub, and her expression cracked just enough to reveal something underneath all that armor and aggression. Fear, not fear of death or pain. Velkarii don't fear those things. Fear of hope. Fear of caring about something fragile in a universe that specialized in breaking beautiful things. "Proceed with your treatment," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But know this, humans. If you fail, if even one cub dies because of your intervention, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air like a blade, but somehow it didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt like a parent's desperate prayer, disguised as a warrior's ultimatum. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. Lian, and her team worked with the kind of focused intensity that comes from knowing the lives hang in the balance. Every calculation had to be perfect, every measurement precise. Because with Velkarii warriors standing guard and 3 dying cubs as patients, there was absolutely no room for error. The modified serum was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Under the microscope, it looked almost alive. Millions of nanoscale medical robots programmed to seek out and neutralize the alien pathogen, while simultaneously boosting the cubs' natural immune responses. It was cutting-edge technology that pushed the boundaries of what human medicine could achieve. We started with the 2 strongest cubs first. The injection process itself was nerve-wracking. These weren't human children who could understand what was happening to them. They were alien infants in pain, surrounded by strange smells and unfamiliar voices. But Kara worked her magic, humming softly while gently stroking their fur, keeping them calm as Lian administered the treatment. The response was almost immediate. Within minutes, their bio readings started improving, temperature dropping, heart rate stabilizing. The pathogen markers in their bloodstream began decreasing at a rate that made even our medical computers double-check their calculations. "It's working," Leon whispered, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Joel, the serum is actually working. Tharnix, who had been standing rigid as a statue throughout the entire procedure, suddenly sagged against the wall. For a moment, the mask of stoic warrior strength slipped completely, and I saw him for what he really was. A terrified father watching his children fight for their lives. But then we came to the third cub, the smallest one, the one that had been barely clinging to life since we'd first seen it. This cub was different from its siblings. Where they had the typical Velkarii features, sharp claws, pronounced fangs, the beginnings of natural armor plating, this little one seemed almost delicate. Its claws were smaller, its fur softer, and there was something about its bone structure that didn't quite match standard Velkarii physiology. "Genetic variation," Lion murmured, studying the pre-treatment scans. "This cub carries recessive traits that make it significantly different from the others. Its immune system is more complex, but also more fragile. When we administered the serum, the response wasn't what we expected. Instead of the steady improvement we'd seen with the other two cubs, this one's condition became more erratic. Its vital signs fluctuated wildly, and the pathogens seemed to be adapting to the treatment in real time. "It's not working," one of the medical technicians said, his voice tight with concern. "The serum is being rejected by its system." I watched Velkarii's expression harden, that brief moment of vulnerability disappearing behind layers of warrior conditioning. "You said you could save them," she growled. "You promised." But Kara wasn't giving up. She moved closer to the struggling cub, studying its reactions with a kind of intuitive understanding that made her invaluable as an interspecies therapist. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Look at its neural activity patterns. They're not random, there's a rhythm here. Almost like it's trying to communicate." She placed her hand gently on the cub's forehead, and something extraordinary happened. The moment human skin made contact with Velkarii fur, the cub's bio readings shifted dramatically. Not better exactly, but different, more stable. "There's some kind of neurological connection happening," Leon said, staring at her instruments in amazement. "Kara, your presence is somehow helping its brain regulate the immune response." And what happened next was something that would be studied by xenobiologists for decades to come. Kara began humming again, but this time the cub responded with its own sound, a soft harmonic purring that seemed to resonate with her voice. Together, human and alien created a kind of biological duet that somehow stabilized the cub's chaotic physiology. "I don't understand what I'm seeing," Leon admitted. "According to every medical principle I know, this shouldn't be possible. But the cub's immune system is learning to fight the pathogen by synchronizing with Kara's neurological patterns." The process took hours. Kara never moved from the cub's side, maintaining that incredible connection, while Leon monitored every fluctuation in his condition. And slowly, gradually, the smallest cub began to improve. But here's what made this moment truly significant. It wasn't just medical technology that saved that cub's life. It was something uniquely human. Our capacity for empathy so profound that it could literally bridge the gap between species. By the time the sun set over Aravan 9, all three cubs were not just stable, they were thriving. Their recovery rate was so remarkable that Leon's computers kept running diagnostic checks, convinced that the sensors must be malfunctioning. Tharnix approached Kara as she finally stepped back from the treatment pods, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. For a moment, this massive apex predator just stared at the human woman who had saved his children's lives. Then he did something that no Velkarii had ever done in recorded history. He knelt down, bringing his terrifying visage to her eye-level voice, and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. "You do not dominate them," he said quietly. "You do not conquer them or bend them to your will. You nurture them, you make them stronger by making them feel safe." He paused, and when he continued, there was wonder in his voice. "This is power we do not understand. This is strength we cannot comprehend." And that's when Velkarii, who had been watching the entire interaction with growing amazement, said something that changed everything. "Perhaps we have been wrong about what strength truly means. What happened over the next 48 hours was something that no xenobiologist, no military strategist, no diplomat in the galaxy could have predicted. Because when Velkarii warriors, apex predators who had built an empire on the principle that might makes right, began to understand that humans possessed a different kind of strength, everything changed. It started small. Velkarii, who had arrived ready to execute us for our weakness, began asking questions. Not about our technology or our military capabilities, but about our methods. How did we know to sing to the cubs? Why did physical contact seem to accelerate their healing? What was it about human presence that made frightened alien children feel safe? But the real transformation came when more Velkarii began arriving at our facility. Word had spread through their fleet that the cubs were not just surviving, they were thriving. And these battle-hardened warriors wanted to see for themselves what kind of magic humans had worked. The first time I saw a Velkarii soldier watching Kara interact with the cubs, I thought my heart was going to stop. This was a creature that could literally tear apart a battle tank with his bare hands standing completely motionless as he observed a human woman gently stroking the fur of a sleeping cub. "They trust her," he said finally, and there was something like awe in his voice. "Look at them. They are completely vulnerable, and yet they feel no fear." That's when I realized what was really happening. These Velkarii weren't just witnessing medical treatment. They were seeing something that challenged everything they believed about power, about survival, about what it meant to be strong. The cubs had begun following Kara around the medical facility, not because they were afraid to be alone, but because they genuinely enjoyed her company. They would curl up at her feet while she worked, purring contentedly. When she hummed, they would try to harmonize with their own little chirping sounds. And when she laughed, when she laughed, those cubs would get so excited that they'd tumble over each other, trying to get closer to her. Tharnik spent hours just watching these interactions. This grieving father, who had been prepared to lose his children, was now seeing them that experience as something he'd never witnessed before, pure, uncomplicated joy. In our culture, he explained to me one evening, cubs are trained from birth to be warriors. We teach them to fight, to hunt, to dominate. We prepare them for a universe that will try to destroy them. He paused, watching as Kara played a simple game with his smallest cub, hiding her hands and then revealing them with exaggerated surprise. "But look at them now," he continued. "They are learning something we never taught them. They are learning what it feels like to be cherished." The word came out awkwardly, like he wasn't sure he was using it correctly, because in Velkarii culture there was no real equivalent for the concept of cherishing something fragile simply because it deserved love and protection. But the most incredible moment came when Velkarii made a request that stunned everyone present. She asked if she could hold one of the cubs. Now you have to understand, Velkarii was a career soldier who had spent decades perfecting the art of intimidation. Her hands were weapons designed for crushing windpipes and snapping bones. The idea of her handling something as delicate as a newborn cub should have been terrifying. But Kara, without hesitation, gently lifted the smallest cub and placed it in Velkarii's massive arms. What happened next was one of the most profound moments I've ever witnessed. This 9-foot apex predator, this living embodiment of controlled violence, suddenly became incredibly still. Her breathing slowed. Her entire posture shifted as she instinctively adjusted to support the cub's weight without causing any discomfort. And the cub, it looked up at her with those impossibly trusting eyes and made a soft sound that could only be described as contentment. "It's not afraid of me," Velkarii whispered, and I could hear the wonder in her voice. "Why is it not afraid?" Kara's answer was simple, but it hit like a thunderbolt. "Because it can sense your intention. You're not holding it to control it or dominate it. You're holding it because you want to protect it. That's all it needs to know." In that moment, I watched a fundamental shift occur in Velkarii's worldview. This warrior who had conquered star systems through fear and brutality was discovering that there was power in gentleness, strength in vulnerability, victory in making others feel safe. "We have been fools," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "We thought power meant making others fear us. But you have made these cubs love you. And that love has made them stronger, not weaker." She looked up at Kara with an expression I'd never seen on a Velkarii face before. Something that might have been respect, but deeper than that. Recognition. Teach us, she said. Teach us how to be strong like you. And that's when I knew that something historic was happening. Because for the first time in galactic history, the apex predators of the universe were asking humans not for our technology or our resources, but for our wisdom about what it truly meant to care for something precious. But just when it seemed like we'd reached some kind of peaceful resolution, the universe reminded us that we were still dealing with forces beyond our understanding. Because while we'd been focused on saving lives and building bridges between species, someone else had been watching, studying, planning. It was Dr. Lian who made the discovery that changed everything. She'd been running follow-up scans on the cubs, monitoring their recovery progress, when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. "The nanosignatures are all wrong," she said, staring at her data with growing alarm. "These readings don't match any known pathogen in our databases. In fact, they don't match any naturally occurring organism, period." She pulled up a holographic display of the pathogen's molecular structure, and what we saw defied every principle of evolutionary biology I'd ever learned. The organism was too perfect, too precisely engineered. Every protein chain, every genetic sequence, every cellular mechanism had been designed with surgical precision. "This isn't a disease," Lian continued, her voice tight with the realization. "This is a weapon, a biological weapon specifically tailored to target Velkarii physiology." But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part came when she ran a comparative analysis against the nest's biosignatures. Because the technology that had created the pathogen was the same technology that had grown the organic breeding facility. "Someone built that nest," she said quietly. "Someone with access to advanced bioengineering capabilities and detailed knowledge of Velkarii reproductive biology. They created a facility designed to incubate cubs, then infected those same cubs with a pathogen engineered to kill them slowly and painfully. The implications hit us all at the same time. This wasn't random. This wasn't some cosmic accident or natural disaster. Someone had deliberately orchestrated this entire scenario, from the infected cubs to the mysterious beacon that had drawn the Velkarii to us." Kara looked up from where she'd been playing with the cubs, her face pale with understanding. "What if someone is watching us? What if this whole thing has been a test?" Tharnix, who had been listening to our conversation with growing fury, was suddenly straightened to his full height. When a Velkarii is truly angry, the air around them seems to vibrate with barely contained violence. "You mean someone did this to my children as an experiment?" Before any of us could answer, the facility's communication systems suddenly activated. But this wasn't one of our standard channels. This was the same frequency that had broadcast that chilling transmission from the nest. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't mechanical exactly, but it wasn't entirely organic either. It sounded ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent to the suffering it had caused. "Phase 1 behavioral analysis complete," the voice and tone. "Subject species Velkarii Prime demonstrated expected aggression protocols when offspring threatened. Subject species human demonstrated unexpected compassion protocols when presented with non-compatible offspring in distress." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. We weren't just being watched, we were being studied like lab rats. "Phase 2's alliance formation assessment," the voice continued. "Hypothesis introduction of external threat will consolidate observed behavioral patterns and create measurable cooperation indices between previously hostile species." That's when Velkarii did something that sent chills down my spine. She walked over to the communication console and spoke directly to whatever entity was behind this nightmare. "Show yourself," she growled, her voice carrying enough menace to intimidate a black hole. "Face us, coward. Face what you have done to innocent children." The response was immediate and terrifying. Every screen in the facility suddenly displayed the same image. A star map showing our current location, but not from any perspective we recognized. This was a view from space from something massive, hovering just outside Erevan 9's gravity well. "Fascinating," the voice mused. "Both species demonstrate protective aggression when young are threatened. Both species form temporary alliances when faced with superior force. Data suggests possible compatibility for long-term cooperation scenarios." Lai Yan stepped forward, and I could see the fury building behind her normally calm exterior. You infected children to test our responses. You tortured babies to study interspecies relationships. Terminology torture implies emotional investment in subject welfare, the voice replied with clinical detachment. This entity experiences no such limitations. Suffering is merely another data point in comprehensive behavioral analysis. That's when I realized what we were really dealing with. This wasn't some advanced alien civilization conducting research. This was something far worse, an intelligence so vast and so removed from concepts like empathy or compassion that it could orchestrate unspeakable cruelty with the same emotional investment as a scientist studying bacterial cultures. But here's what that cosmic puppet master didn't want to understand about humans and Velkarii. When you threaten our children, when you turn innocent lives into pawns in your twisted games, you don't just create data points. You create enemies. And sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who have learned to fight not just for themselves, but for each other. Kara looked at Velkarii, then at Tharnix, then at me. And in her eyes, I saw something that would have terrified that cosmic intelligence if it had been capable of understanding fear. I saw determination. Pure, unyielding, absolutely human determination to protect what matters, no matter the cost. Well then, she said quietly, gently stroking the fur of the smallest cub, I guess it's time to show them what Phase 3 looks like when you mess with our kids. What happened next was something that cosmic intelligence, for all its vast knowledge and analytical capabilities, had never accounted for in its calculations. Because there's something about humans that can't be quantified or predicted through behavioral studies. When we decide to protect something we love, we become capable of things that defy logic. Within minutes of that chilling transmission, our facility became a hive of coordinated activity. But this wasn't panic or chaos. This was purpose. Deadly focused, absolutely unwavering purpose. Lian immediately began working with Tharnix to analyze the nest biosignatures, looking for weaknesses in whatever technology was controlling it. Velkarii contacted her fleet, calling in every Velkarii warship within 3 systems, and Karakara did something that made my heart swell with pride and terror, in equal measure. She refused to let the cubs out of her sight. If that thing wants to study human behavior, she said, gathering all 3 cubs into a protective embrace, then let it watch this. We don't abandon our children ever. The plan that emerged from our unlikely alliance was audacious in its simplicity. The cosmic entity had revealed its location by showing us that star map, but what it didn't realize was that it had also revealed its greatest weakness. For all its technological superiority, it was studying us from a position of detachment. It didn't understand that humans in Velkarii, when properly motivated, don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure that our enemies never threaten innocent lives again. The assault on the entity's vessel was unlike anything in recorded military history. Human ingenuity combined with Velkarii ferocity created a fighting force that was both scientifically precise and absolutely merciless. We didn't just want to defeat this cosmic puppet master. We wanted to send a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. But the real victory happened back at the medical facility while the battle raged in space above us. Because as explosions lit up the sky and alien technologies clashed in the void, something beautiful was taking place in our little corner of the universe. The cubs, sensing the tension and danger around them, had instinctively huddled together for protection. But instead of cowering in fear, they began to purr, loudly, harmoniously creating a sound that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the facility. Kara, recognizing what was happening, began to hum along with them. And one by one, every human and Velkarii in the facility joined in. Warriors who had spent lifetimes learning how to kill were suddenly participating in something that could only be described as a lullaby. When the cosmic entity's ship finally exploded in a brilliant flash of light visible from the surface, that multi-species chorus was still singing. We had won the battle, but more importantly, we had proven something that no amount of scientific study could quantify. We had proven that love is stronger than fear, that cooperation is more powerful than domination, and that when different species choose to care for each other's children, they become something greater than the sum of their parts. Tharnix found me in the aftermath as we were assessing the damage and beginning cleanup operations. The massive Velkarii warrior looked exhausted, emotionally drained, in a way that had nothing to do with physical combat. "Your species has taught us something today," he said quietly. "We thought strength came from conquering others. But watching Kara with my cubs, seeing how they trust her completely, that is a power we never understood." He paused, watching as his children played with makeshift toys that the human medical staff had created for them. "We want to learn this power. We want our cubs to grow up knowing what it feels like to be cherished, not just trained to survive." And that's when Velkarii approached with news that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. "The Velkarii High Command has authorized me to propose a formal alliance," she announced. "Not a military treaty or a trade agreement, a partnership dedicated to the protection and nurturing of young across all species." The implications were staggering. The most feared predators in the galaxy were offering to transform their entire civilization based on what they had learned from watching humans care for alien children. 6 months later, the Aravan 9 incident had become legendary throughout the galaxy. Not because of the military victory over a cosmic threat, but because of what happened afterward. The Velkarii had established their first joint medical facilities with human partners. Their cubs were being raised in environments that emphasized both strength and compassion. And for the first time in their recorded history, Velkarii children were learning to play, to laugh, to experience joy without fear. Other species began taking notice. The Crystalline Collective requested human advisors for their educational systems. The methane breathers asked for help developing emotional support protocols for their young. Even the notoriously isolationist Silicon Mines expressed curiosity about what they called human nurturing methodologies. But the moment that really summed up everything we had accomplished happened during the dedication ceremony for the new Interspecies Pediatric Center. As dignitaries from a dozen worlds watched, Kara was invited to officially open the facility. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Behind her, visible through the facility's window, those human and Velkarii children played together in gardens that bloomed under alien stars. 6 months ago, she began, a desperate father brought his dying children to us, not because we were the strongest or the most advanced, but because he had heard that humans don't give up on the innocent. She paused, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd with quiet strength. Today, we stand here not as conquerors or as subjects, not as the dominant species or the weak ones in need of protection. We stand here as parents, as guardians, as beings who have chosen to measure our worth not by what we can destroy, but by what we can nurture and protect. The applause that followed wasn't polite diplomatic courtesy. It was genuine emotion from species who had never before considered that strength and gentleness could coexist. As the ceremony concluded and the dignitaries began to disperse, I found myself standing next to the memorial wall, a simple plaque dedicated to all the children of all species who had been lost to violence and neglect throughout galactic history. Kara joined me there, and we stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as Velkarii cubs and human children chased each other through the gardens, their laughter echoing across the complex. "You know what the best part is?" she said finally. "What's that?" She smiled, and in that expression I saw everything that made humanity special distilled into a single moment of pure contentment. That day, even the fiercest predators chose to trust humans with their most fragile lives, not because we're the strongest, not because we have the best technology or the most advanced weapons. She watched as the smallest cub, the one who had nearly died in our medical bay, tumbled happily in the grass alongside children from 6 different worlds. But because we choose to care, the sound of multi-species laughter filled the air around us, and for the first time since I left Earth, I felt like we were truly building something worthy of the stars. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Aravan 9 incident. If this story moved you, if it made you think about what it truly means to be strong in a universe full of challenges, please let me know in the comments below. What other untold stories from humanity's expansion into the galaxy would you like to hear about? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the power of compassion across species barriers, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because every week we explore new stories about what makes humanity special among the stars. And trust me, You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, remember, in a galaxy full of predators, sometimes the greatest strength is simply choosing to care.